Some folks will like you and some that just won't. Some that stay real and some that just don't. Trying to fit in will only take you so far. You'll never find home trying to change who you are. So don't spend your whole life trying to be what you ain't. You can't hide your heart with a new coat of paint. You think they'll accept you, I promise they can't. So just be who you are, forget what they think. So just be who you are and forget what they think.
Welcome to Vet with a Mic, content driven by veteran issues. Today, we are talking with Michelle, who is a former Marine and a current doctoral student, achieving her doctorate of psychology. And I really am excited about this conversation for a few different reasons. Number one, because you are a Marine and you are a female Marine at that. So you're going to bring a really unique perspective that I don't think often gets talked about a lot. So Michelle, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah. I cannot complain. Today has been a bit of a cluster, but that's okay.
You know, what day isn't? I mean,
right. The ones that end with Y, I think.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about your time in the uniform. What was your job?
I worked with the supply battalion, 1st FSSG at Camp Pendleton, California. I actually worked directly for the company commander. I got pulled out of the warehouses and worked directly for the company commander. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of had a more idealized experience than a lot of the people, you know, at my rank and age did. I was privy to a lot more of the inner workings of what was going on in the company and in the battalion itself. I also had the great experience of working for a battalion commander who loved his NCOs. And he thought they were the backbone instead of it being the officer corps or, you know, the staff corps. His NCOs, he thought, were the backbone. And so he would do amazing things for us. You know, any of the special things that we went out and did, we were the ones in charge. And so that was a really great experience. So I had a lot of training. I had training in military police, which was fantastic as well. And just kind of a lot of different things along the way. I didn't stay in very long. They tried to give me a promotion to stay in, and they were going to separate me and my husband at the time. And so I turned it down. So I was only in for 4 years, although I got called back when we went into Kuwait in 91. I think it was 91. So
we're talking about Desert Storm era.
Yeah. I'm much older. So
much older.
I'm 55. So I mean,
well, my joints are 65, so I win. You know, we often don't get a chance to really rap with people that are from an era that is not the post 9/11 era, because, the experiences are just so different.
Yeah, it is
because
very different.
The warfare was warfare was different. Yeah. You know, the war on terror was just a beast, and it definitely took some adjustments within the uniform to address the evolving climate that was the war on terror. Right. But so tell me, all right, so you were in the early 90s, you got out. Mm-hmm. So what happened in that period of time where you just transitioned out?
Well, I was married to a Marine, and he was in much longer than I was. So we were still very much involved in the military way of life. We went on to have 4 children. We lived on military bases. You know, he spent time away from us. You know, our first year of marriage, he spent in Japan. And I had a baby. So, I mean, and I was still in at that time. So, I mean, it was a very different time, not really conducive to family life, in all honesty.
And it really isn't. But this is fascinating to me because so now you've been in the uniform and now you're a dependent.
Yeah.
Tell me what that must have been like, because that is a pretty stark difference between being in the uniform and then now you're a dependent.
Well, right. Because you're automatically viewed differently, you know? being in the service and then being a dependent is two very separate things. And so, there are those of us that had that experience of both. But they are profoundly different. As a dependent, you almost feel like a hanger-on. I don't even know how to say that well, but you're just a reality that the service has to accommodate,
Yeah.
So like when it's time to move the Marine, wow, now we got to think about the family too. We really don't. We can just send them and they have to just figure their shit out. That's the way it works, which is what we do. So yeah, it's a very different mindset. It's a very different experience. You no longer have this place you go to every day, and yet you're very much aware of the dangers that are associated with that, with the job that your spouse is doing.
Yeah.
So it's yeah.
So a friend of mine is in a relationship with a former Marine who's a female. And one of the things that she expressed to me was, I just don't like that I don't have any say anymore. Like I used to be able to pick orders. I used to be able to say, this is where we're going. But now I'm with him. And so now I just go where he goes.
Yeah.
And that is a huge adjustment for me. Yeah.
Well, and the other part of this was when I was as I said, I worked directly for a company commander. I ran an office and I ran a group of Marines. They were mine to command and do with us to get the job done. Yeah. When you step out of that position and you're no longer in, you remember how that authority feels, but you no longer have that authority.
Just another asshole walking around Walmart.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So you're having to adjust mentally to a couple of different things. At first, you're all like, "Ooh, I'm out. Nobody can tell me what to do anymore." And then you think, "Oh, I can't tell anybody else what to do anymore either." So you have to kind of adjust your mindset.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, but it sounds like that had a few different layers then, because you were still circling the military world, so to speak. Yeah. I mean, you're right. The way we frame it, we call you dependents. It's not, it's very much like you're a hanger on. You're but I guess that would have been a little different than somebody who like they get out of the service and they just leave the military orbit, so to speak.
That's a whole different thing. And again, that was still something that I went through right along with my husband at the time when he got out of the service, because you're used to being taken care of, so to speak. Yeah. We had base housing or we had housing assistance. Our medical was taken care of. If one of my kids got sick, I went to the doctor. I didn't think about it. I mean, right down to when we got out, having to go and find a place to live, I didn't know that you paid for water to come in your house and to leave your house. It didn't occur to me. I never had to worry about that in my life. I never had to talk to utility companies. Yeah. My grocery shopping was done on the base. Now I got to go find a grocery store. Like everything was very, very different. And the first time that one of my kids got sick after we got out, I thought, oh my God, where do I go to the doctor? I don't even know. I don't even know how to find a doctor. So you were very insulated. Yeah. In that lifestyle. And then suddenly you're not. And you got to figure it out.
Yeah. So being married to a Marine, how long did he stay in?
He was in just short of 13 years.
13. All right. So eventually then, as you were saying, your orbit around the military life and the military culture at some point did come to an end.
Yes.
And then now you're both and your family are having to deal with life after the uniform and all the ancillary support that actually the uniform provides for you.
Yeah.
So what year would that have been? Was that early 2000s, I guess, at this point?
Gosh, let me think. I got called back in 91. When did he get out? I think it was 97. I'm trying to remember. It's been so long ago, honestly, that I don't recall exactly. But, he had to go find a job. He had to, a lot of interview process, which he had never done, which was foreign to him. Right. And so, and then moving, trying to figure it all out. Like I said, trying to go through finding a place to live, all of the stuff that goes along with that, school for our kids, everything, was very foreign to us. And, there's a certain amount of, you don't realize it till after you don't have it anymore, but there's a certain cushion that you feel when you're in the military. Like, oh, I get 30 days leave. Oh, we can take a family vacation. Well, you're not taking 30 days off in the civilian world. You're just not doing it. So there's those little things that you don't know or think about. And then the other part of that is when he went to interview for a position, he had the training that he needed and everything. But what we didn't understand is how much money we actually made in the military when you added in all of the benefits that we had.
Yeah.
We hadn't taken that into account. We
like
were
a housing allowance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And your medical and all of this stuff. And we were only thinking about how much money did he actually make. And so, we got this offer for this job. Oh, it's a great offer. Well, it's not.
Right.
Because you didn't take into account all of these other things that have always just been provided for you that you now pay for.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think that's one of the things too, is we're singular focused. When we're ready to get out, dang it, we're ready to get out.
Yeah.
I made this joke about 100 times at this point now. There was a Looney Tunes hole in the wall, me sized, like whenever I was ready to get out, I was not having it anymore.
Yeah. I think that was true of my husband as well. Like when I decided to get out, it was to keep our family together. When he decided to get out, it's because he was just tired of all the bullshit. He's like, he's like, if I walk outside, I don't have a cover on my head and somebody can reprimand me for it. And I'm a 30-year-old man. That's ridiculous. So he just kind of reached a point where he's like, that's it.
I got out. I got out right before, I guess I was 29 when I got out. That's probably, there's some age developmental thing where you're just like, you know what?
That's it.
Nah, no more. So that's interesting to me. So you've lived a pretty awesome life, or at least I would say there is a diverse experience in which you have had, because you've been in the uniform. Now you've also spent some time as a military dependent, which as we have talked about, was an adjustment.
Yes.
But you're 55, as you have just said, and you have aged quite gracefully.
Oh, thank you so much.
I know that because we go to the same gym. But
we do.
another thing where you find veteran connections, it's often in the gym.
That's a good point.
But you are now a doctoral student at age 55. Yeah. So tell me, fill in the gap for us from this point to that.
Well, I was pretty much a stay-at-home mom after I got out of the military. Like, as I said, I have 4 kids. And so pretty much my job was taking care of them, supporting him in whatever he did. And I when I had them all in school, when the youngest one went to kindergarten, I decided I wanted to go back to school. I had gone to some college when I was younger before I went in the military. I didn't appreciate it then. I didn't do well. I was very careless with it. And
I'm familiar with that story.
In other words, you're a screw up. That's what that is.
Well, I know it's my story. I'm saying like I'm familiar.
No, it was mine too, because I had been on my own from a very early age. Yeah. And had worked full time. And basically that's why I went in the military, because I was just tired of trying to be an adult when I wasn't an adult. And so now it was time to think about school again. And I was very interested. I've always been very interested in school. So I went back to school. I was 42 when I got my first degree in accounting. I went on then and finished a master's in business administration. And I have a couple others that I'm still working on, a bachelor and master's program in biblical studies and pastoral counseling. But I reached a point in my business world. I started my own business. I was dealing with a lot of business owners, and I was finding a lot of lack of ability to change, to grow and be successful.
Inflexibility, right?
Yes. And it became very interesting to me. And so that's kind of what sparked my interest in psychology to begin with. But once I got into the study of it, I realized this is so profound, because psychology is involved in every single person and every single thing that we do. We just don't know it most of the time.
Right. Yeah.
And so, I got very interested, and then decided that I wanted to pursue more education. And the form of that is now a doctorate. I'm at the doctoral level. So I don't know what I'm going to do after this.
Yeah. You peaked out. Fellowship, maybe. Yeah.
I'll have to find a new subject matter.
Well, so you just kind of skimmed over, which I don't know if this is necessarily that relevant to our discussion today, but you also have wrote a book.
I did. It was published this year, 2021, actually.
Yeah. I mean, what was the title?
The title is Into the Gray. And it's basically a book on the psychology of changing your mind about a deeply held belief system. And in my case, it was a religious belief system. Yeah. But that also plays in, and we were having a discussion previous to the recording, that plays into everything in your life. Basically, religion is pretty much a catalyst for most of our life. It plays into how we think, religiously. It plays into how we think politically, locally, socially, culturally, everything. And so when you start changing your mind somewhere along the way, all of those things are going to shift. And there's a psychology that goes along with that. It's almost a traumatic experience. Well, not actually almost. It is absolutely a traumatic experience.
Yeah.
So,
And so to kind of put it something that we've talked about on this show quite a bit is the military itself and the experiences that you have are a part of that change.
Absolutely.
Because you are exposed to so much of the world, your worldview shifts and you lose a lot of the same framework that you had before the uniform.
Yes.
Even within social relationships, you no longer feel as connected to people that you were friends with, for example, before the uniform, because your experiences have varied so differently between these last few years that you're in the uniform.
Well, I mean, the reality of the situation is this. You have these friends before you go in the military. You choose to make this your way of life. Whether you consciously say it out loud or not, it's inherent in the decision that at some point you could be called upon to risk your life, up to and including your life, to defend the Constitution of the United States and your country. And so you now have stepped into an arena where those that are not making that decision absolutely cannot understand it. They have an idea of what they think about it, but their ass isn't on the line, so to speak.
Yeah, they get skin in the game. Yeah,
exactly. It's a very different mindset. And so, yes, you do begin to see things very differently than them. There's no way you can't.
Yeah.
And so you kind of lose that connection. You lose that connectivity because they can't understand your life anymore. So they're kind of a fond memory. We all get out and think, oh, I'm going to go home and leave. It's going to be so much fun. I'm going to see my friends. And you really find out you don't have a whole lot in common with them anymore.
Yeah. Well, even just that, because I've mentioned this before, going on vacation, you go back home.
Yeah.
Like you go on leave to go home.
Yes.
People at home, they're like wanting to go down to Panama City Beach.
That's right.
Woo! Right.
Well, I got a beach somewhere. And we're like, yeah.
No, I do that already.
My beach. Well, in the case of the last few years, my beach is a sandbox in the Middle East. So.
Right. I mean, I was like, I said that, jokingly, obviously, but my last duty station was in Sicily. So we had these awesome Italian beaches that we could go to whenever, we had off time, whatever that was. But, it was nothing for us to go down to like Taormina for the day, which is just this beautiful, gorgeous Italian beaches that celebrities go to. Now going back and somebody say, hey, you want to get on to Panama City Beach? Not really the same allure. No, really, not at all. And you can't really unsee.
You were in the Navy, right?
Yeah.
Well, see, Marines don't get to go to those nice places like that.
Yes, they do. You know why? Because they were stationed with me. I know they did.
Your ass is at Camp Lejeune, Camp Pendleton. You're on the Rock in Japan. You may get embassy duty here and there, but or you're on a ship.
Right, the Muse. So, but even being in Okinawa, that's a pretty good duty station. But Marines often mess it up all the time because they get their liberty looked down.
Yeah, I never got to go. My husband, as I said, our first year of marriage was there. I never heard a favorable thing about Japan, about Okinawa. So.
Because their liberty's always getting secured.
Yeah, they're always in trouble or something. So I'm sure he was one of those.
Probably. So so let's talk about so the book, which is really powerful. Just this idea of how much psychological strain can often be introduced with these kind of paradigm shifts within your world. So let's talk about your paradigm shift that you have right now, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So your doctoral school.
Yes.
What's the end point for there? Have you decided? I know I kind of put you on the spot there.
Well, as I said, my degrees, and a lot of people don't understand this. My degrees are in accounting and business. And now I'm working on a doctorate in psychology. So right away, people are like, that doesn't make any sense. Well, as I mentioned, there's a lot of psychology that is in everything that we do.
Yeah.
And so there is a connection. The end game is my doctorate is going to be a clinical doctorate, which means I can do counseling. Quite honestly, I spend a lot of time doing counseling now
Sure.
without the doctorate. People that know me
Without
well,
getting paid for it, right?
and
Yeah.
without getting paid for it. Even people that know me in the gym know that I'm a gym therapist. Like everybody ends up coming to me and telling me their stuff, whether they mean to or not. And but I also, I am ordained. So I have that behind it as well. I'm a certified life coach. So I have a lot of little things along the way that actually center around that decision.
Right.
So, this just seemed like the logical conclusion to that, to have a clinical doctorate behind my name. Whether that means I'm setting up a shingle somewhere and I'm going to start seeing, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know at this point, which, seems like a lot of work if I'm not going to do that, but I like the option.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, just having the maxing out on the education scale, so to speak, does just add a certain credibility to
Absolutely,
your voice too.
Yeah.
So let me ask you though, because this is something that I personally have struggled with.
Mhm.
Do you want to work with veterans?
I think it's important that somebody does, for sure. And I'm not opposed to doing it. Here's where I hesitate. As I mentioned, I wasn't in that long. And so immediately I kind of distanced myself. I know I'm a veteran. I'm fine with being a veteran. But when I think of a veteran now, I think of those people that have literally been in the line of fire. And that was never me. And so, I have a tendency to differentiate, even though, yes, I'm a veteran. Yes, I signed on the dotted line like everybody else. I didn't end up with that experience. And so I, to some degree, end up feeling less than on the veteran scale.
So are you surprised to hear that I hear that a lot?
Really? I am surprised because I tend to think I'm the only one that thinks that. So.
Yeah. So 85% of jobs within the military are not combat related jobs. They're all support staff.
Yeah.
So only about 15% of the jobs that are out there are carrying a rifle in the performance of their duty. An even smaller percentage of those actually have direct line of fire contact.
Right.
So if we're leaving that to be the qualification of who can treat veterans, that's a remarkably small portion of the veteran identity.
You're right. It is. And as I said, the other part of that also is because I am much older, I'm much more removed from it than a lot of other people. And so I have a tendency to kind of diminish that experience when I probably shouldn't. But I do passionately believe that our veterans need mental health counseling, that should be a part of transitioning out of the military service, that should be automatic. And I have a lot of thoughts on veterans. So I still identify strongly that way, that having had at least that little bit of experience I have had, and then of course being a dependent of another Marine, and continuing on in that lifestyle for a while, you see and hear a lot of things that you think these are things that need to be addressed for people that are transitioning out of the military. And unfortunately, we just don't do a good enough job of that. Yeah. We don't.
So it is funny though, because I do hear this a lot, this undermining of our own service quality.
Yeah.
And I mean, even with people who are, I got a good buddy of mine was a door kicker in Iraq during some pretty intense times. And he expresses some of the same, let's just say, he mutes his experiences a lot because he doesn't put them on the same scale as, I guess, something that would be like a media representation. And so if we're all doing,
he actually sounds like somebody that is the personification of
what we and so we're all doing it, and it has psychological effects all the way down, all through the ranks, no matter what your job is. And I think largely, and this is something you and I were talking about before that I would like to bring up, is this adoration that we feel or that we have from the civilian population. They put a lot on us.
Yes.
By even just saying thank you for your service, you're forcing a veteran into this internal evaluation, because they'll say, oh, thank you. But internally they may go, but I didn't do anything.
Right. Well, there's also, and I don't remember if you used this term with me before or not. I think you did. And I identify with it very much, though. There's that imposter syndrome effect taking place. And most people experience imposter syndrome in some form or fashion in their life. So it's
Yeah.
not surprising that you would see veterans doing the same thing. The other part of that, I think, too, especially for those veterans who were, of course, in the line of fire or were more involved in what we personify as military life.
Yeah.
There's that sense of violence, that sense of trauma being induced that maybe they want to separate themselves from to some degree. So diminishing that helps to separate themselves from that reality.
Well, but you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
Right. Absolutely.
So if you tell a civilian that, did you see any combat? If you say yes, what do they do? I bet you he's a psycho. That's and if you say no, there's this implied.
Oh, so you weren't really that important.
So you're in this catch-22.
Yes.
And so like we were in some pretty intense situations in my time, in mobile security, and I would reframe them for who was I doing that for?
Right.
Was I trying to make the civilian feel better about how they were going to subjectively evaluate? Was it to make them feel better? Like they weren't comparing their like manhood to mine, or was it to minimize the stereotype of what an unhinged veteran is like? Right. All of these evaluations are kind of just running in the background, and these everyday thank you for your service kind of interactions. And as you and I were talking about, they're largely virtue signaling. Now I know that there are there are some great people who are sincerely thanking you.
Absolutely.
But if that's all you're going to do, you're not really helping us. No. You walk away with the impression of, I'm a good person. I thanked the vet today.
Right.
And it makes us feel uncomfortable.
It does.
Really.
100%. I feel uncomfortable every time somebody says it to me. I'm like, whatever. Every single time. And
so let me ask you this.
I agree with you. I think that they have the right intention. I just think that it's kind of like offering thoughts and prayers when that's the situation calls for something much greater.
Thanks. My house is, decimated and
thoughts and prayers. Well, yay.
I appreciate it. Yeah. We're rebuilding my front porch. Yeah. So these are these complicated issues that I think largely we kind of circle within this format here within the podcast, because these are the way veterans really do feel. And I hope that hearing both of us talk about it, they go, oh, okay, well, it's not just me then. It's not like the fact that you said that you kind of undercut your own contribution there. I know I hear it every day from other veterans. And whenever I point it out to them, they go, really?
Really? Yeah. I mean, it doesn't occur to me that other people feel that way as well, because it seems like, but again, I know just for me anyway, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that are like this. I have a tendency to diminish myself entirely in life. And so this is just another area of that for me, where I look at somebody who served and has actually been where I think, the real service members are, and I think, well, why would they diminish that? I mean, they're doing what everybody expects the military to be doing. But this as well as I do, the military is a lot of hurry up and wait. That's that's what your life is. And there's pockets of activity involved in that, so I guess it makes sense that everybody kind of diminishes it, but it just doesn't occur to me that other people do.
Yeah. Do you think that's the Marine in you? Because you're not a Marine, maybe you get in the suck,
Yeah. Well, that may be true, but I think that probably was something that was present in me before the Marines. I've talked about this previously in the gym, but I come from a background with a lot of abuse. And so I have a tendency to diminish myself anyway as a form of self-protection. And so it's almost this catch-22 where my personality is somebody that needs affirmation. But when I get affirmation, I'm incredibly uncomfortable. Right. And so somebody thanking me for serving is like, oh, that's great. Yeah, just don't look at me. So I think that was around before the Marine Corps. And then this is a response that comes out of that. So
Well, I had a conversation with a Marine just excuse me, he's not a Marine. If he's listening, I'm sorry. He was a warrant. He was a warrant in the Army, and he was a
Oh,
helo pilot. But he and I were kind of talking about. He said, "I don't like to be recognized," and I said, well, "We all feel that way. We really do. I really don't like somebody to come." But he also described a situation in which it was Veterans Day, and they asked all veterans to stand, but he had kind of, I guess, he had kind of got there a little later, and he was already standing in the back, and they never recognized him.
oh.
They never gave like the little
Yeah.
gifts out. They didn't give one, and he was really upset about it. He said, "I was pissed," and I said, "Well, why wouldn't you be? That's a huge part of your identity."
Right.
And
Right.
here it is. If there's somebody who's going to get recognized, we all better get recognized, right? You know?
Well, it's one thing if we choose to diminish ourselves. It's another
Yeah.
if somebody else diminishes that.
Yeah.
If somebody, I'll tell you right now, it's very easy for me to go, oh, it's not that big of a deal. But if somebody were to say, well, you weren't really a Marine, I'd be like, what the hell are you talking
Well, you know.
about? Yes, I was.
Yeah.
So, I think it comes down to whether it's us doing it or somebody else doing it as to whether it's
Yeah.
okay or not. So,
Yeah. Because especially, Marines get a certain adoration for being, the tough branch, and I can't tell you how many times that even though I spent over 2 years in and out of some pretty difficult places, I can't tell you how many times people said, well, at least you didn't do anything dangerous. You were in the Navy.
See, that's a terrible assumption for anybody to make.
Right?
I mean, look, we joke about things like that in the services, because my
Right.
mom and dad were both in the Army. My husband's family had people that were in the military. He was the only Marine in his family. I was the only Marine in mine. So we will make jokes about being superior to always. And so that's just military.
Yeah, you guys get your choice of crayons every time. Like it doesn't first in line.
That's right. But for somebody else to make that assumption is kind of a leap. Again, that's them stereotyping something.
Yeah.
That they
And
probably
so
don't know much about.
So I'm glad because we've kind of circled this issue too, that you brought that up. Just the word stereotype is what we're kind of experiencing here. What we're talking about is stereotype threat. We don't want to, number one, confirm a negative stereotype that is out there floating, whether it's the unhinged veteran or whatever. But we also have this really intense need to uphold the standard that others have laid down for us, whether other eras, World War II guys, Vietnam guys. So we don't want to do anything that diminishes their image, because they did so much for us. So that's a lot of psychological pressure to kind of balance these two realms all the time, and just also be a normal, flawed human being, riddled with self-doubt and complicated interactions with the world. And then because of this stereotype threat, we don't want to do anything that confirms some negative image that people have, or we don't want to diminish just the legacy of those who have served in the uniform. That's a lot of pressure to manage.
It is. And because the reality is this, we are still just fallible people before you ever go into the military. So of course you're a fallible human being while you're in the military and after you exit the military. So you're right. There is this expectation that somehow you're supposed to be a better, different person, but maybe you're not.
Yeah.
So there is that delicate balance.
Yeah.
Trying to uphold that tradition at the same time, saying, look, there may be things about that system that need to be fixed. I respect it, but there are things that have to be changed or fixed. So it's a delicate walk on a tightrope, basically.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think these are complicated issues, and these are the things that kind of drive our failure to adjust, quote unquote, after the uniform. These transition issues, even the high suicide rates, the abuse rates, all of these issues may be consumed by these complicated feelings that we have about our service and upholding or not confirming negative stereotypes.
Mhm.
I'm
Well,
not trying to overemphasize it because it's much more complicated than that, but
right.
it's certainly worth having a conversation about.
Yeah,
All
absolutely.
this adoration that you think you're doing great for us, you may end up being fueling the fire. Like, and no, and it's a pendulum, because
Sure.
obviously the Vietnam era guys and gals, they did not deserve what happened to them.
No.
So
Well,
now
they're
the pendulum may
victim
have
of the
swung too
politics
far
of
the
the
other
day.
way. Yeah.
As are any veterans or active duty, you are a victim of the politics of the day. And we talked about that a little bit before we started recording, the whole idea
Yeah.
of toy soldiers. My contention being that often the military is seen as nothing more than a battering ram or a toy soldier towards some political ploy. And I find you want to piss me off, talk about that a little. I'll get real pissed off, because I absolutely abhor the idea that somebody who gets elected into a position can then use my name and my status as a veteran to control a vote somewhere, to add something to it, because he knows the military doesn't get turned down, only to get his way on some other thing. That pisses me off, nothing flat.
Yeah.
Um,
They're
when
clout chasing, as the kids call it, right?
Yeah, because here's the problem, and again, we talked about this a little bit. The idea that there are things that are wrong and that people are experiencing when they come out of the military that nobody's addressing, but they're more than happy to attach something to do with the military to another bill to get their way on something. How about if we address the issues that actually affect the veteran and the active duty military right now? You mentioned a little bit ago the number of suicides per day. It used to be 22. It's higher than that now. Somebody just told me that the other day. They're like, no, it's closer to 32 now. How fucking sad is that?
Yeah.
That
No.
you have people at that level per day that have some mental problem that they feel like they can't be here anymore. Nobody's addressing it. That's disgusting. And how about the fact that we don't have job counseling when people come out of the military? For the most part, you're like, oh, thanks for your service, get your ass out the door. They may not have housing, but there's all kinds of stuff, right down to, and this was another thing for me while I was in, and I'm sure that there are others that can identify with this. There was a period of time when my husband and I were both in the military with a child. At that time we had one child. Because we were both enlisted, we actually didn't earn that much money. We qualified for food stamps as active duty military serving our country. That's crazy. Why is your military not making enough money to support itself? So there are issues and problems out there, but nobody wants to address those. They only want to address their pet project and use it in the military's name to get their way.
Yeah.
That just pisses me off.
Yeah, no, there's plenty of frustration. Yeah. No, and it's well taken. Because there are these we always hear about these big military budgets that get signed into law. And then you look at where it goes to, and most of the time the troops on the ground are not really living to the standard. Don't get me wrong. I feel largely that, we're taken care of in the uniform decently well. We have a place to stay and good food. Well, food to eat.
Let's not go crazy and call it good.
Yeah. Well, I was on an Air Force base for a little while. Maybe
they eat really well on Air Force bases.
Yeah.
I was on one too, and they eat well.
They do. It is a totally different world.
It's very, very different. In the Marine Corps, you eat well one day a year, and that's the Marine Corps birthday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They feed you well on that day.
If you're able to hold it down after all the and then they just slop it up and feed it to you for breakfast the next day. Yeah. So no, you're right. There is there is a little bit of political expediency that kind of happens. And one of the things that I'm really kind of sensitive about is I don't want to use veterans as a prop. I'm not a prop. I don't want it to be used as a prop. Some of the time, a lot of the organizations that are out there helping, they take their photo ops, they come up, they do their little pause and moment. And actually a guy I had spoke to before is an amputee. Lost his leg in, I believe, in Afghanistan. And he and I talked because I saw somebody come up to him and kind of take this generic photo op with him. And I got real like defensive for him. Like, you know, who are these people? Right.
Right.
And so I walked up to him like, hey man, what's that about? And he was like, oh yeah, they were some organization. They took a picture with me. And I was like, why? He goes, I don't know.
I don't know.
And I was like,
probably quit thinking about it after a while. I mean,
they got their social media posts for the day, I guess. And then so something he said to me, he was like, man, I really hate that people with invisible wounds, like, you know, they don't get recognized at the same. He said, man, I just happen to have my leg missing. So it's easy for people to see at first glance. He said, but my brothers and sisters that I served with that were in my unit that came back with invisible wounds,
right.
I get really protective over them because they largely fade into the background.
Yeah. It's a valid
point. Yeah.
Very valid.
But it just kind of ties into this whole idea of the way the culture interacts with us and how the culture within the military culture views it.
Well, you know, not too long ago, I'm in Tennessee now, but I'm from California. I lived in California for over 30 years. And I lived in a very nice little town north of LA. After we got out of the military, you know, we relocated there. Very nice area to raise kids and everything. A couple years ago, again, this is a city that's considered one of the safest cities in the country. Yeah. It's in the top 10 for its size every year. There was a mass shooting in a bar called Borderline, which was 3 miles from my house. And my kids used to go there. And luckily they weren't there that evening, but it was a former Marine, corporal, who went in. He killed quite a few people, including a police officer, and he died. And of course, you know, there was all this discussion afterwards as to what brought that on. Now, I don't know what the determination was, but one of the things that they talked about was PTSD and how horrible it was, you know. But what did they do about it? Did that spur any kind of change as to how they dealt with service members and PTSD? Or was it just a talking point? You know, I tend to believe it was more just a talking point. I don't think there's been any great, big, large-scale change in how they deal with service members and mental health screening for PTSD, which is something we absolutely should do because we've had service members in the line of fire now for quite a few years. Yeah. And we're still not thinking about their mental health when they return, which of course could have disastrous results as it did.
Yeah. So I have a little, I'd say a unique perspective on this because there is some ownership that we need to take from within the community about this because the resources are absolutely there available to us, but then we don't utilize them.
I agree.
Because of the stigma and a lot of the, I'd say, misinformation or misunderstanding that surrounds the mental health issues in which we have. So we have to be more of an active participant within our own care. We have to take more accountability for the quality of care in which we receive by interacting with these resources and holding them accountable to the care in which we receive.
Right. No, I agree with that.
Yeah. Also, the reason I hear a lot about the reason why we don't utilize it at such a to our detriment, let's just say, is we believe these stories that we hear second and third hand from other veterans about how terrible the VA is. And here's the thing. I'm not saying that we have a, check your source kind of thing, but veterans are flawed, fallible human beings who are capable of having bad days and going and just melting down on somebody. And then the person maybe they didn't handle it well either. And so because this negative interaction happens, they go out and tell 10, 20 people about this negative thing that happened to them. And then it just kind of spreads across the entire veteran community. Right. But the truth of the matter is we have to take more ownership in having those experiences ourselves and understanding that this is a system. It has limitations. Right. We're going to have to interact with it and be the best advocate for our care as possible, which means not getting snarky with somebody on the phone.
That's hard to do.
It is. Because I call it the rule of four with the VA. You'll go through 3 people who will pretend like that wasn't their job before you get to the 4th person, and they'll go, "That absolutely was their
Yeah, that
job,
was
man.
their
I'm
job."
sorry. I'm sorry. Let me fix that right now." And they
Yeah.
won't. So you'll get transferred 3 times till you get to the
Right.
4th person who actually will provide this. So I just I do a lot of talking, trying to prepare people that that's just kind of something that's a structural norm for them, I guess. And
I think
if you just write it out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good valid point that a lot of times it is hearsay. My husband, when he got out of the military, got out as a disabled Marine.
Mm-hmm.
He lost a good portion of his hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he's dealt with the VA for years. And to my knowledge, it's been a good experience. I mean, he's received disability for years. They're very good about having hearing aids for him. He gets the top of the line, brand new stuff all the time. Good follow-up with them. I know that he has at times, and I think right now even, he and I are separated right now. So, but I think he actually uses counseling services through the VA right now. So there's a lot of good services there. As you're pointing out, though, a lot of times people will go around that because they've heard it's not a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, if it's shitty mental health counseling versus no mental health counseling, you should at least opt for the shitty mental health counseling if that's what you think it is. That's still better than nothing.
Yeah.
And unfortunately,
and whenever if it is subpar,
Mhm.
your utilization, because this is something that I guess I discovered here recently too, because it acts as they utilize a head count rule, basically, that the more people that utilize the services, the more resources allocated to it.
That makes sense.
So if you don't like it, you're participating within the programs itself actually reinforces the likelihood that it will get better. So just endure, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the reality is that if a system is broken, it gets fixed by those who are experiencing its brokenness, by them speaking out or advocating for the changes that would fix it. So it does behoove the community to actually try and use those services to advocate for better services if they feel it is deficient. So again, that's another tightrope place though, because in the case of the gentleman that I referenced, I don't know that he knew he had those mental issues. So he needed the community around him at the time to say, you need some kind of counseling. So that does absolutely need to come from within the service itself, as well as the civilian side that is seeing behavior that's disruptive afterwards. And so when I say that we need more mental health screening for people that are exiting the military, I think it has to become more commonplace, not just that it's available through the VA, but that it's actually a requirement for you to evolve out of the service. That like it's on the checklist. Oh, have you been to talk to a mental health counselor? No. Well, that has to be done before you transition out. I feel like that's stuff that could be changed that would be beneficial just in general. But that doesn't mean they're going to catch everything. It doesn't mean that they're going to fix everybody, but at least there would be some kind of heads up as to maybe there's something problematic here that needs follow up. And that would be beneficial not only to the service member, but to their families and to the community that they transition into.
Yeah.
At the time.
Well, I think another fair point here too is going back to this idea of what shitty mental health service is.
Well, there's that. I mean, how do we define that?
And what your expectations are going into it, which is largely one of my mission statements here, is demystifying the process, understanding what you can expect going into mental health services, because it's not a magic wand. It's not just going to fix you. It takes a lot of hard work. And I'm man enough to say this here, as I've said in my private life, there were many sessions that I just cried. And that takes a lot of, no, not at all. But I'm just saying that is hard work.
Absolutely.
It's hard work. Yeah. And since a lot of the hallmarks of PTSD is to avoid, I think a lot of people are looking for reasons to confirm of why they shouldn't do it.
Right.
So
that bleeds into a bigger subject matter, and that is the perception of mental health in general. Mm-hmm. It tends to have a very negative connotation associated with it. That most people are trying to hide anything that they're struggling with because it would be looked down upon. or you
as
would
a
be
character deficiency.
absolutely. When in reality, a great majority, and we're finding this more and more now, a great majority of our population suffers with anxiety to debilitating levels, or depression to the point where their suicidal ideation is becoming evident. There's lots of different mental health issues that are out there that most people just don't want to discuss because it's got such a stigma associated with it. And that's what needs to change. Mental health discussions need to become more normalized so that it's okay for somebody to say, I'm really struggling. I'm really struggling. Now, I believe that 100%. I've believed that for a long time, but it wasn't until this year that I got counseling for some stuff. And I think the other side of that is like you mentioned, it's a lot of work. It's emotionally exhausting to go unpack all of your shit for somebody. And hope that you're okay. That they're going to go, no, you're okay. So a lot of people won't even take that step because it's so daunting to consider. So these are things that have to change. We have to normalize it, and we have to encourage people to take advantage of it, not just in the military realm, but in the civilian realm as well.
You're right. The society at large has a misconceived idea of what mental health looks like. Not just mental deficits, but mental health. Because you have to invest in your own mental health.
Right.
And our culture, the society, the American culture largely has done a pretty piss poor job in encouraging people to invest in their mental health.
Well,
there's not, like I've said this 100 times probably at this point, I have no magic test that I can give you. There's no magic assessment that we can perform for you that's going to tell us everything that we need to know about you, and B, that's just going to make you, oh, well, now we know exactly what to do next. So
here's what you do, and now you're all better. It doesn't work that way.
And so understanding that helps you become a more informed consumer. It takes away this what if out there, this unrealistic, which often ends up being like a catastrophizing kind of moment where you're thinking of the worst possible things. Well, they're going to institutionalize me if I go. And they realize that no, that's not really the way. You don't give up your civil liberties just because you go to the doctor for diabetes. You don't give up your civil liberties. It's the same thing with mental health issues.
Right. Well, and again, and you and I spoke about this previous too, before we started recording, but a lot of that comes from a lot of religious programming in our society as far as what's acceptable to show to everybody and what's not, that somehow if you have mental health issues, that maybe it's somehow sinful or something. And so people want to hide that part of themselves as opposed to saying, look, here's my crap and I need to figure it out so that I'm a healthy functioning part of society instead of being a threat to society. If it's that severe, or maybe I just want to try and be a healthy, happy person and I'm not capable of it. But if everybody finds that out, they'll assume things about me that may not be true based on stereotypes that are just stereotypes. They're not necessarily based in reality.
Well, something my mentor says all the time is, and if you're listening, Doc, this is a shout out for you, is there's no casserole effect for mental health issues. And those of you who are not familiar with what the casserole effect is when there is a major issue in the community, a neighbor has some loss that they're experiencing, the neighbors will cook them casseroles and go give them casseroles to their house so that they'll have something to eat. So that's just one less thing that they have to think about. So there's no casserole effect for mental health issues. Largely what happens is when somebody has let's just say a child gets diagnosed with autism, or there's somebody is hospitalized for a severe panic attack or whatever. There's a tendency within our own culture and society, not just within the military culture, to just ignore that. Just nope. We don't. We're not going to lend a hand because I don't understand it and I don't know what to do with that. So
well, there's this tendency, even when people have some kind of physical malady, there's a tendency feel uncomfortable in the discussion of it because you don't know what to say. You know,
Yeah.
you feel like you're supposed to say something, but you don't know what it is. Well, that's only exacerbated when we're talking about mental health issues because it really is largely misunderstood. And so because of that, now you really don't know what to say. So we'll just ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist. And that way everybody's more comfortable.
Yeah.
But it doesn't fix the situation, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. So, and it makes those people who have those issues feel even more isolated and alienated from everybody else. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I went through a whole period of time where, and I've dealt with anxiety and depression the majority of my life. Honestly, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I did not realize how much anxiety has played a role in my life. I'm very high functioning anxiety. And I had no idea how much anxiety actually played a role in my life. I always thought it was more depression than anything. And I'm coming to understand that anxiety has been the number one problem for a long time. Yeah. But there was a period of time that I went through that where my background, family-wise, religious-wise, everything told me that taking any kind of medication was a lack of faith on my part. It wasn't acceptable. And so when I finally reached a point where I'm like, I know I need help, and I went to a doctor and actually started taking an antidepressant for a while, I told nobody, not even my husband at the time, because I felt embarrassed that I was deficient to that level, or that I didn't have enough faith, or, you know, whatever the number of things that people would say. And it reached a point where it was a crisis point where I decided the guilt of taking something that I felt like I wasn't supposed to was so great that I decided to stop taking it. And I just stopped taking it cold turkey, which anybody will tell you is a big fat no-no.
Yeah.
And it was a horrific experience. And by then, of course, I had to tell somebody because I was at a crisis point.
Yeah.
And so I had to go back on it, step down off of it, go through all the counseling, you know, and explain to people what was happening, and really struggle through that crisis, because I felt like I couldn't discuss it because of these expectations of other people. And how good would it have been had I felt safe to tell somebody, you know, by the way, I'm really struggling with this, I'm considering this, and we could have had a very level-headed conversation about it, as opposed to me trying to hide it. And I think that's a lot of people's experience, maybe not to that level, but certainly there's some trepidation to treating themselves for something that's very real because it's not socially acceptable.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
I think on some level, it's almost easier to have like a major health crisis than it is to have a mental health crisis, because, you know, like, oh, well, you know, that's not your fault, as though mental health issues are your fault, you know, that somehow you hope for that.
Yeah.
So
you know, or you're just being hysterical, or, you know, whatever. Yeah.
And don't think I didn't have that conversation, especially as a woman.
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know the root of hysteria? Like where it came from?
I think I've heard that somewhere before. I don't recall though.
No, I could be wrong, but this is, I think I'm remembering this correctly, but hysteria was the wandering womb.
Really?
So hysteria was from your female parts. And that's the reason why they said women were hysterical.
I had an experience one time, and this is just to clarify, like, women face a lot of different challenges when it comes to medical issues and will as far as mental health issues as well. But I had a problem one time where I literally I had gained weight. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't feel good. I went to the doctor. My kids were little at this time. And I went to the doctor and I was trying to explain to them what was going on. Now, at that time, it didn't occur to me that it had anything to do with anxiety or depression or anything. I'm sure that played a role in it. But I went to this doctor, and his way of treating me was to say, I just don't think you've processed 9/11 yet. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? And basically he told me, you're just being a hysterical female, is what he told me. I was so livid. I couldn't even speak. I left. Well, now it's been several years since then, obviously, but I have celiac.
Oh,
and
goodness.
That's what was going on. And instead of him addressing the symptoms that I was trying to discuss with him, he immediately assumed, as a woman, I must just be being hysterical. Right. And so there is a challenge, you know, that differentiates people. You know, when you go for mental health issues, or if you go to medical health issues, it doesn't matter. There's always going to be somebody that has an idea of what they think you're dealing with, instead of just, you know, doing the work.
Well, I'm glad you also mentioned that too, because it still circles this idea. Whether or not you're trained as a clinical psychologist or you're trained as a physician, you're still human.
Well, of
You can be
course.
good. You can be good at your job. You can be bad at your job.
True.
And just because somebody has the title doesn't mean that they're
No.
shit hot, so to
That's
speak.
exactly true.
And so I think that, kind of also brings up this issue of, look, don't put all that on that person either. They could be bad at their job. It doesn't mean that like you abandon medicine altogether just because you came across one person that was no. And I use that because I've referenced something else. I came across somebody that we just didn't have a good therapeutic alliance. I'll just say that's as kind as I can say. And if I just abandoned my faith in the process, I wouldn't have got the therapeutic gains that I had after.
Well, I think that's a really good point, because I think there are a lot of people that say they have a mental health issue that they really would like some counseling for, that maybe they've tried with one counselor and it was a bad experience for them, and so they just gave up. That's why it is important in the discussion of looking for mental health help that we remember to encourage people, like, you have to find the right person for you.
Yeah.
And the same is true with any kind of doctor, regardless of what you're talking about. You have to find a person that aligns with you, that's willing to listen. And I got very lucky when I went to counseling earlier this year. I just reached out anonymously and I clicked with her immediately. And it was great until a few months ago when she decided she was going back to teaching full time. And so I was left without a counselor. And so there's a part of me that's like, I need to find another counselor. And then there's another part of me that was like, I don't know that I'll find somebody that I'll click with like that again.
Yeah.
And I have to unpack everything again. And I'm really just completely not looking forward to that. So
sure.
But that other person is incredibly important. And it doesn't mean they're a bad person if you don't click with them. It just means they're not your person.
And it doesn't mean that you're a bad client either.
That as well.
Because
personalities and how they work together.
And just because if you go and you're just, that you don't really mesh well, there's not a good therapeutic relationship there with somebody, it's completely normal to have several providers across your life.
Right.
Because people move, people change, professions, like yours goes back into teaching. There's lots of life variability that'll happen. So you may end up having several different. And so that even if you don't click with the first one or the second one or the third one, you're going to click with somebody, or you'll at least get to the point where you've explained yourself so many times at that point, you're like, you know what, I can work with it.
I think I got it.
Yeah. But because I've dealt with that in my own personal life too. A family member calls me up, says, hey, I'm wanting to take my kid to a professional. What do I do? So kid goes, bad fit. Kid goes, maybe I'm bad at this.
No.
And of course that's the way a kid would deal with it.
Yeah, of course.
It's just to completely assign all the blame to themselves. And I had to walk through this family member of, no, that's a part of the process. It's a relationship.
Right.
You're not just because somebody has some letters after their name, just immediately they be the right provider for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and again, that's what it comes down to. It comes down to personality types and, familiarity. All of that's important when you're establishing any kind of relationship, but certainly one that deals with your mental or medical health.
Yeah.
You want that individual that you are going to click with, that is going to be the right fit for you. And unfortunately, it does sometimes lead to you having to look for a little while. But it comes down to how important that is. And a lot of times, especially in the mental health realm, I think it really takes us coming to a crisis point before we realize, this isn't a maybe anymore. This is, I have to now.
And you can't ignore it anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You've reached a point where the pain has become more than you're able to deal with.
Yeah.
And again, there should be no shame in that. It just is. We all have those things in our life that produce difficulty for us emotionally.
But to also say this, because I'm a big fan of Viktor Frankl, that suffering that we are going through, there can also be profound meaning in it.
Sure. We can learn a lot from it.
Yeah. And enduring itself sometimes becomes the meaning in which we find in our life. So even though we are suffering or having to endure certain things, that doesn't mean that we abandon all ye hope, right?
Right.
Yes, we're all flawed creatures fighting against entropy.
Mhm.
But sometimes just to endure, there can be profound value
Mhm.
within that.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to overstate that at all, but I'm a big fan of Viktor Frankl.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, again, that's going to come down to the individual, though.
Mhm.
I mean, some people are going to be more mentally tough, if you will. I'm going to use air quotes there, and able
Yeah.
to work through something more so than somebody else would be able to.
Yeah.
And so, to me, the message needs to be, if in doubt that you need help, ask.
Yeah.
And then if you're able to work through it on your own, that's fine. But feeling free to ask for help should be vital for everybody.
Oh no, I hope you didn't
No.
hear
I
that.
I just want to
that
make
I was saying endure it by yourself. No.
no.
Yeah.
I want to make sure we reiterate that, because I
Yeah.
feel like that's the problem for so many people, especially people that I've spoken with. They're suffering in silence.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, I talk to a lot of people in my everyday life.
Yeah.
And I'm always amazed at the incredibly difficult and emotional things that they'll just tell me out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I'll think, my God, they're not talking to anybody about this. And then I realize, oh, they're talking to me.
Right.
So
Oh
there's
hell, I'm the
yeah,
I'm the
oh God.
adult. Oh no.
So
Yeah.
all this responsibility, so, but
Yeah.
that's one of my first things, is to encourage them. Maybe this is something that needs to be discussed with somebody,
Yeah.
on a more professional level, so that
sure.
you're not working through this on your own, because,
I know in no way, shape,
oh,
or
I'm sure.
form meant to, and even warmly or tepidly suggest that just tepidly or tacitly. The
Tacitly, but all right,
the
whatever.
GRE, whatever. Right. So we'll go with yours.
Whatever. That's why we
Yeah.
use dictionaries when we write.
Right. So even lukewarm.
Yeah, there you go. Use that one.
I didn't mean to come across even just lightly
No, I
endorsing
didn't
that,
think you did. I didn't think
because
you did.
you're absolutely right. You're doing something on your own, your probability of succeeding is really low.
Much
But
lower.
if you increase your social capital, if you reach out for relationships, professional and your social support elements,
Mhm.
your likelihood of enduring exponentially goes up.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
I just meant to say that just because we're going through something terrible doesn't mean that, number one, it'll last forever.
Right, of
And that
course.
number two, that we can't have some real growth coming out of it.
Absolutely. Well, we talked earlier, again, before we were recording, about, for me, I've been in a transition now for quite a few years. And, sometimes there's that feeling that this is the most horrible thing I've ever lived through. And I don't know when and if it'll end. And it is emotionally and mentally exhausting. However, I will say this, that looking back at where I was and where I am now, I would do it all over again, because there has been tremendous growth out of it, even in that pain. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that I wrote about in my book, and it's a metaphor that I think holds true, is the metamorphosis of the butterfly. When, there's this thing that comes up from within, that allows for that process to happen. And in that process, there's death. There's actual death of the entity to transform into something else. So there is hardship associated with it, but there is growth and change, which is beneficial. And so I think it comes down to how we choose to look at our circumstances. Is this the be all end all of everything? Or is there something that I can ascertain from this that is beneficial to me? And again, that's going to come down to the individual, what they have inside of them. And hopefully, and I truly do believe most people have enough in them to grow and learn from difficult circumstances, if they're given that opportunity.
Tepid. That's the word.
Tepid. Okay, now that
I mixed tepid and tacit together.
Whatever.
Right? See, but look, you gotta you can't take yourself too seriously, right?
No,
You gotta live life in the
you're a
moment,
human
right?
being.
Yeah. See, we're all making mistakes as we
That's right.
go. Right?
We all do it every day. So
Yeah. So, is there anything else that you think we need to cover? No. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up or talk about? You got another book coming out or anything? No.
I actually have collaborated on several. One that's out, one that'll be coming out this next year, and I just got a phone call today asking me to collaborate on another one. So, but they're all different subject matter. A lot of them are theological in nature. Some psychological. Mine was more psychological and theologically combined. So yeah, lots of different things. I'm also speaking at a conference in March here in Nashville.
Yeah. Is there a title that people may be able to go and check you out?
I don't recall what it is.
That's all right.
How bad is that?
I'm
still nailing down what they want me to talk about because I'm not sure I'm in exact agreement with the whole premise of the
right. Yeah.
So I'm like, you want me to talk? Like, are you sure?
Are you sure?
No.
Are you
sure you know who you're talking to?
Yeah. No. Well, that, and if I can't shoehorn you into doing a podcast with me too, that'd be another thing too. That I think there is a sufficient need in voices like ours out there in the space.
Yeah, there is.
I think that one of the reasons why I think people have gravitated towards Vet with a Mic is because they are hungry for voices like ours right now.
I think it's important that there is real world experience in the voices that are out there. We all have a tendency to try and put our best foot forward, and show only the best. And I think there's real value in the very difficult conversations of what the nitty gritty of life is actually like.
Yeah.
And for people to know that they're not alone in whatever challenge they're facing is beneficial. Yeah. We all like to know that we're not the only ones. So like earlier when you said, I diminished my service, and you're like, oh, so many people do that. And I was like, really? It's good to know I'm not the only one. I mean, I tended to think I was.
Or whenever I say tap it.
And they go, oh, that guy's not so smart either. So.
Yeah, he's not that bright. Yeah. No, I never have once claimed to be bright ever.
Yeah. Well, none of us like to make mistakes, so we all want that.
No. But I think to your point is, it's important to have honest, authentic conversations that people can see that whatever credibility you have as a speaker also has a good position from, I guess you'd say, their heart's in it, so to speak.
They're a real person.
Yeah.
Their struggle. And, I mentioned before I had done a couple podcasts previously, and I've just put those on hold most recently because it's been a rough year for me. But the one that I had, it was a mental health podcast, and we did what we called our mental minute. And it was two of us that ran the podcast, and we would literally discuss how our week had gone. And we did some very in-depth, wow, it's been a shitty week. And why, and we questioned whether that was a good idea because the podcast was geared more towards professionals in the psychology realm. However, it was for the everyday lay listener as well. And I said, I'm 100% an adamant encourager that is necessary because it cannot just be this very intellectual discussion. It has to be a very real and raw discussion sometimes because that's what people attach themselves to, is that emotion. Yeah. And that's where the biggest change comes from. So this is definitely very necessary.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. So, we'll go on forever if we don't call it.
I still have cardio to do.
Yeah, this may be a series that we'll just go ahead and ordain you. No pun intended. as Doc Michelle coming on and doing a little bit of a guest spot every so often.
Oh my goodness!
But no, I have enjoyed it immensely.
Me too.
And every single time I've had a conversation with you, I've felt energized from it, which is
thank you.
Which is a good thing because most people are almost like, oh, right.
Well,
I kid. I'm
not bad from a chance meeting in the gym, then, right?
Right. No kidding. Well, it's the ink too. That's what it was.
Is that what it was? My tattoo? Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I was like, wait, is that? Because my vision's not the best anyway. So I was like,
yeah. That's my hemoglobin anchor. So.
So we have been talking here with Michelle, who is a doctoral student and is I guess you'd call her a jack of all trades at this point, but
Yes.
also has some theological background. And if you've enjoyed having listened to this conversation with Michelle, and you know somebody who may benefit from listening to it as well, please, I implore you, spread the word, encourage others to come by the Vet with a Mic podcast and check out our content, because we are really putting our heart and soul into this. And I get so many affirmations every day from people who are enjoying it and talking about the cool stuff we do here. So I really believe in our mission. But as always, however life finds you, I hope life finds you well. Till next time.